Hello, here we are for Leviticus 11. And we had talked last night about what it meant to be cut off from your people, and I thought it was just something temporary. It most certainly is not. It means that as far as heaven goes, you missed it, okay? When Moses died, he was gathered to his people. That means that he died with honor, he died amongst his brethren, went to lay with his fathers. When you're cut off from your people, you're basically the word is not infidel, but you're an outcast. Okay, there's no honor. You've just been completely and utterly rejected by heaven. So when God says if somebody does this or that, they're to be cut off from their people, that's horrible. That means you missed it. Okay, you're not going to be gathered to your people. You're going to be cut off from them. So there's going to be no honor in your death. Okay, and whatever happens to you afterwards is the court of heaven, as that law that we read about, Kareth, said that it's not an earthly judgment, it's a heavenly one. And this is what the Lord is telling these guys, okay? So let's get going with Leviticus 11. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, say to the Israelites, of all the animals that live on the land, these are the ones you may eat. You may eat any animal that has a divided hoof and that chews the cud. There are some that only chew the cud or only have a divided hoof, but you must not eat them. The camel, though it chews the cud, doesn't have a divided hoof. It's ceremonially unclean for you. The hyrax, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean for you. And if I remember correctly, the hyrax is like a rodent. The rabbit, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It's unclean for you. And the pig, though it has a divided hoof, doesn't chew the cud. It's unclean for you. You must not eat their meat or touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you. Now let's remember, this is the beginning of all things. This is God dealing with the Israelites and setting up Levitical, or I should say the law of Judaism, okay? The laws, the original laws. Of all the creatures living in the water of the seas and the streams, you may eat any that have fins and scales. Excuse me. It's very hot in here. But all creatures in the sea or streams that don't have fins and scales, whether among all the swarming things or among all the other living creatures in the water, you're to regard as unclean. So I'm trying to think what that would be. You may eat any that have fins and scales. So does that mean we can't eat crabs because they don't have fins? Okay. Whether among all the swarming things or among all the other living creatures in the water, you're to regard as unclean. And since you're to regard them as unclean, you must not eat their meat. You must regard their carcasses as unclean. Anything living in the water that doesn't have fins and scales is to be regarded as unclean by you. Now remember, this doesn't have anything to do with you, okay? We are free in Christ to eat what we want to eat. God showed Peter that, didn't he? Okay? These are the birds you're to regard as unclean and not eat because they're unclean. The eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the red kite, any kind of black kite, any kind of raven, the horned owl, the screech owl, the gull, any kind of, hawk, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, the hoopoe, and the bat. Okay, can't remember what a hoopoe is. Let's look it up really quick because I think it's a woodpecker, but let's just look it up. Hoopoe. It's going to tell us right now. Yeah, it is a, wow. Actually, it's not a woodpecker. It's something completely beautiful. And I'll put a picture of it up, okay? Yeah, I'll put it up so you can see it. It looks like a woodpecker, but it's a little more brilliant. All right, so no bat eating either. All flying insects that walk on all fours are to be regarded as unclean by you. There are, however, some flying insects that walk on all fours that you may eat. Those that have jointed legs for hopping on the ground. Of these you may eat any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, or grasshopper. But all other flying insects that have 4 legs you're to regard as unclean. You will make yourselves unclean by these. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean till evening. Whoever picks up one of their carcasses must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean till evening. Every animal that doesn't have a divided hoof or that doesn't chew the cud is unclean for you. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them will be unclean. Of all the animals that walk on all fours, those that walk on their paws are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean till evening. Anyone who picks up their carcasses must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean until evening. These animals are unclean for you. Of the animals that move along the ground, these are unclean for you. The weasel, the rat, any kind of great lizard, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the wall lizard, the skink, and the chameleon. Of all those that move along the ground, these are unclean for you. Whoever touches them when they're dead will be unclean till evening. When one of them dies and falls on something, the article, whatever its use, will be unclean, whether it's made of wood, cloth, hide, or sackcloth. Put it in water. It will be unclean till evening, and then it will be clean. If one of them falls into a clay pot, everything in it will be unclean, and you must break the pot. Any food you're allowed to eat that has come into contact with water from any such pot is unclean. A spring, however, or a cistern for collecting water remains clean, but anyone who touches one of these carcasses is unclean. If a carcass falls on any seeds that are to be planted, they remain clean. But if water's been put on the seed and a carcass falls on it, it's unclean for you. If an animal that you're allowed to eat dies, anyone who touches its carcass will be unclean till evening. Anyone who eats some of its carcass must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean till evening. Anyone who picks up the carcass must wash their clothes, and they'll be unclean till evening. Every creature that moves along the ground is to be regarded as unclean. It's not to be eaten. You're not to eat any creature that moves along the ground, whether it moves on its belly or walks on all fours or on many feet. It's unclean. Don't defile yourselves by any of these creatures. Don't make yourselves unclean by means of them, or be made unclean by them. I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy. Do not make yourselves unclean by any creature that moves along the ground. I am the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt to be your God. Therefore, be holy, because I'm holy. These are the regulations concerning animals, birds, every living thing that moves about in the water, and every creature that moves along the ground. You must distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between living creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. Okay, Leviticus 12. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, a woman who becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days, just as she is unclean during her monthly period. On the 8th day, the boy is to be circumcised. Then the woman must wait 33 days to be purified from her bleeding. She must not touch anything sacred or go to the sanctuary until the days of her purification are over. If she gives birth to a daughter, for 2 weeks the woman will be unclean as during her period. Then she must wait 66 days to be purified from her bleeding. When the days of her purification for a son or daughter are over, she's to bring to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting a year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or a dove for a sin offering. He shall offer them before the Lord to make atonement for her, and then she will be ceremonially clean from her flow of blood. These are the regulations for the woman who gives birth to a boy or a girl. But if she cannot afford a lamb, she's to bring 2 doves or 2 pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. In this way, the priest will make atonement for her, and she will be clean." So that was all of Leviticus 12. So now if anyone asks you, what did the Old Testament say about women who give birth, you can point them right to Leviticus 12, and it shows you the old law, okay? Leviticus 13. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when anyone has a swelling or a rash or a shiny spot on their skin that may be a defiling skin disease, they must be brought to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons who's a priest. The priest is to examine the sore on the skin, and if the hair in the sore is turned white and the sore appears to be more than skin deep, it's a defiling skin disease. When the priest examines that person, he'll pronounce them ceremonially unclean. If the shiny spot on the skin is white but doesn't appear to be more than skin deep and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest is to isolate the affected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine them. And if he sees that the sore is unchanged and has not spread in the skin, he's to isolate them for another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine them again, and if the sore has faded and has not spread in the skin, the priest shall pronounce them clean. It's only a rash. They must wash their clothes and they'll be clean. But if the rash does spread in their skin after they've shown themselves to the priest to be pronounced clean, they must appear before the priest again. The priest is to examine that person, and if the rash has spread in the skin, he shall pronounce them unclean. It's a defiling skin disease. When anyone has a defiling skin disease, they must be brought to the priest. The priest is to examine them, and if there's a white swelling in the skin that has turned the hair white, and if there is raw flesh in the swelling, it's a chronic skin disease, and the priest shall pronounce them unclean. He's not to isolate them because they're already unclean. If the disease breaks out all over their skin, and so far as the priest can see, it covers all the skin of the affected person from head to foot, the priest is to examine them. And if the disease has covered their whole body, he shall pronounce them clean. Since it has all turned white, they are clean. But whenever raw flesh appears on them, they will be unclean. When the priest sees the raw flesh, he shall pronounce them unclean. The raw flesh is unclean. They have a defiling disease. If the raw flesh changes and turns white, they must go to the priest. The priest is to examine them, and if the sores have turned white, so I'm assuming like dusty, scabby looking, the priest shall pronounce the affected person clean, then they will be clean. When someone has a boil on their skin, and it heals, and in the place where the boil was, a white swelling or reddish white spot appears, they must present themselves to the priest. The priest is to examine it, and if it appears to be more than skin deep and the hair in it has turned white, the priest shall pronounce that person unclean. It sounds to me like God's really trying to teach them how to guard against leprosy, okay? Because leprosy was so deadly in those days. It is a defiling, the priest is to examine it, and if it appears to be more than skin deep and the hair in it is turned white, the priest shall pronounce that person unclean. It's a defiling skin disease that's broken out where the boil was. But if when the priest examines it, there's no white hair in it and it's not more than skin deep and has faded, then the priest is to isolate them for 7 days. Sorry, I'm trying to get my glasses on my face correctly. Okay. If it is spreading in the skin, the priest shall pronounce them unclean. It's a defiling disease. But if the spot is unchanged and hasn't spread, it's only a scar from the boil, and the priest shall pronounce them clean. When someone has a burn on their skin and a reddish white or white spot appears in the raw flesh of the burn, so this sounds like staph infection. The priest is to examine the spot, and if the hair in it is turned white and it appears to be more than skin deep, it's a defiling disease that is broken out in the burn. The priest shall pronounce them unclean. It's a defiling skin disease. But if the priest examines it, there's no white hair in the spot, and it's not more than skin deep and has faded, then the priest is to isolate them for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine that person, and if it is spreading in the skin, the priest shall pronounce them unclean. It's a defiling skin disease. If, however, the spot is unchanged and has not spread in the skin, but has faded, It is a swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce them clean. It's only a scar from the burn. If a man or woman has a sore on their head or chin, the priest is to examine the sore, and if it appears to be more than skin deep and the hair in it is yellow and thin, the priest shall pronounce them unclean. It's a defiling skin disease on the head or chin. But if when the priest examines the sore, it doesn't seem to be more than skin deep and there's no black hair in it, then the priest is to isolate that affected person for 7 days because they want to see what's going to happen to it. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine the sore. If it is not spread and there's no yellow hair in it and it doesn't appear to be more than skin deep, then the man or woman must shave themselves except for the affected area, and the priest is to keep them isolated another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine the sore, and if it hasn't spread in the skin and appears to be no more than skin deep, the priest shall pronounce them clean. The priest is to examine them, and if he finds that the sore has spread in the skin, he doesn't need to look for yellow hair. They're unclean. If, however, the sore is unchanged so far as the priest can see, and if black hair has grown in it, the affected person is healed. So in other words, if your skin is doing what it always does, your hair is growing, the hair of your skin is growing, you're fine. They are clean, and the priest shall pronounce them clean. When a man or woman has white spots on the skin, the priest is to examine them, and if the spots are dull white, it's a harmless rash that's broken out on the skin. They're clean. A man who's lost his hair and is bald is clean. That's interesting because, in those days, they might have thought if you lost your hair, you had a disease. Your hair's falling out. So a man who's lost his hair and is bald is clean. If he's lost his hair from the front of his scalp and has a bald forehead, he's clean. But if he has a reddish white sore on his bald head or forehead, it's a defiling disease breaking out on his head or forehead. The priest is to examine him, and if the swollen sore on his head or forehead is reddish white like a defiling skin disease, the man is diseased and is unclean. The priest shall pronounce him unclean because of the sore on his head. Anyone with such a defiling disease must wear torn clothes, let their hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of their face, and cry out, unclean, unclean. As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone. They must live outside the camp. So I've said this before. It's like if we have a cold, we usually don't have washed hair and we've got raggedy old clothes and we say, don't get near me, I have a cold. So this is the same thing. If they have a disease, they're supposed to just deal with the disease. Don't worry about getting dressed up. Let people know that you're sick. And in this case, they were saying, unclean, unclean, don't come near me. Okay, so that's what that's about. As for any fabric that's spoiled with the defiling mold, any woolen or linen clothing, any woven or knitted material of linen or wool, any leather or anything made of leather, if the affected area in the fabric, the leather, the woven or knitted material, or any leather article is greenish or reddish, it's a defiling mold and must be shown to the priest. The priest is to examine the affected area and isolate the article for 7 days. On the 7th day, he's to examine it, and if the mold has spread in the fabric, the woven or knitted material, or the leather, whatever its use, it is a persistent defiling mold. The article is unclean. He must burn the fabric, the woven or knitted material of wool or linen or any leather article that's been spoiled because the defiling mold is persistent. The article must be burned. But if when the priest examines it, the mold is not spread in the fabric, the woven or knitted material, or the leather article, he shall order that the spoiled article be washed. Then he's to isolate it for another 7 days. After the article has been washed, the priest is to examine it again, and if the mold has not changed its appearance, even though it has not spread, it's unclean. Burn it, no matter which side of the fabric has been spoiled. If when the priest examines it, the mold has faded after the article has been washed, he's to tear the spoiled part out of the fabric, the leather, or the woven or knitted material. But if it reappears in the fabric, in the woven or knitted material, or in the leather article, it's a spreading mold. Whatever has the mold must be burned. Any fabric, woven or knitted material, or any leather article that's been washed and is rid of the mold must be washed again, then it will be clean. These are the regulations concerning defiling molds in woolen or linen clothing, woven or knitted material, or any leather article, for pronouncing them clean or unclean. See how they do that? They tell you something and then they kind of they encapsulize it with a statement. This, they read the laws, or they state the laws, and then they say these are the laws, like those were the laws. Okay. All right, here we go. The Lord said, this is 14, and this is our last one for tonight. The Lord said to Moses, these are the regulations for any diseased person at the time of their ceremonial cleansing when they're brought to the priest. The priest is to go outside the camp and examine them. If they've been healed of their defiling skin disease, the priest shall order that 2 live clean birds and some cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop be brought for the person to be cleansed. Then the priest shall order that one of the birds be killed over fresh water in a clay pot. He's then to take the live bird and dip it together with the cedar wood, the scarlet yarn, and the hyssop into the blood of the bird that was killed over the fresh water. 7 times he shall sprinkle the one to be cleansed of the defiling disease and then pronounce them clean. After that, he's to release the live bird in the open fields. Now that actually, when we read this the last time, I looked into it and they said that was a picture of Jesus Christ and his healing work. By his stripes we're healed. The person to be cleansed must wash their clothes, shave off all their hair, and bathe with water. Then they will be ceremonially clean. After this, they may come into the camp, but they must stay outside their tent for 7 days. On the 7th day, they must shave off all their hair. They must shave their head, their beard, their eyebrows, and the rest of their hair. They must wash their clothes and bathe themselves with water, and they will be clean. On the 8th day, they must bring 2 male lambs and 1 ewe lamb, a female lamb, each without defect, along with 3/10 of an ephah. I believe an ephah was like 9.5 gallons, something like that. Of the finest flour mixed with olive oil for a grain offering, and 1 log of oil. The priest who pronounces them clean shall present both the one to be cleansed and their offerings before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Then the priest is to take one of the male lambs and offer it as a guilt offering, along with the log of oil. He shall wave them before the Lord as a wave offering. He's to slaughter the lamb in the sanctuary area where the sin offering and the burnt offering are slaughtered. Like the sin offering, the guilt offering belongs to the priest. It's most holy. The priest is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of their right hand, and on the big toe of their right foot. Wow, just like the young priests, Aaron's kids. The priest shall then take some of the log of oil, pour it in the palm of his own left hand, dip his right finger into the oil in his palm, and with his fingers sprinkle some of it before the Lord 7 times. The priest is to put some of the oil remaining in his palm on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of their right hand, and on the big toe of their right foot, on top of the blood of the guilt offering. The rest of the oil in his palm the priest shall put on the head of the one to be cleansed and make atonement for them before the Lord. Then the priest is to sacrifice the sin offering and make atonement for the one to be cleansed from their uncleanness. After that, the priest shall slaughter the burnt offering and offer it on the altar together with the grain offering and make atonement for them, and they will be clean. If, however, they are poor and cannot afford these, they must take 1 male lamb as a guilt offering to be waved, to make atonement for them, together with 1/10 of an ephah of the finest flour mixed with olive oil for a grain offering, a log of oil, and 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, such as they can afford, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. On the 8th day, they must bring them for their cleansing to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting before the Lord. The priest is to take the lamb for the guilt offering, together with the log of oil, and wave them before the Lord as a wave offering. He shall slaughter the lamb with the guilt offering, and take some of its blood and put it on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of their right hand, and on the big toe of their right foot. The priest is to pour some of the oil into the palm of his own left hand, and with his right forefinger sprinkle some of the oil from his palm 7 times before the Lord. Some of the oil in his palm he's to put in the same place as he put the blood of the guilt offering, on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of their right hand, and on the big toe of their right foot. The rest of the oil in his palm the priest shall put on the head of the one to be cleansed, to make atonement for them before the Lord. Then he shall sacrifice the doves or the young pigeons, such as the person can afford, one as a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering, together with the grain offering. In this way, the priest will make atonement before the Lord on behalf of the one who is to be cleansed. These are the regulations for anyone who has a defiling skin disease and who cannot afford the regular offerings for their cleansing. Okay, so first we saw in the last chapter what you have to do if you're unclean, or if you have something, you have to take it to the priest and let him look at it. Then he makes the decision whether he pronounces you unclean, whether he puts you in isolation, and all of that. Then when all of that stuff is over, you do this ritual of offering, guilt offering, sin offering. You do all of that, okay? It's the finishing work of the disease that you had, okay? It's your finishing work that you do to get, I don't know, back in the fold, maybe. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when you enter the land of Canaan, which I'm giving you as your possession, and I put out a spreading mold in a house in that land, the owner of that house must go and tell the priest, I've seen something that looks like a defiling mold in my house. The priest is to order the house to be emptied before he goes in to examine the mold, so that nothing in the house will be pronounced unclean. After this, the priest is to go in and inspect the house. He's to examine the mold on the walls, and if it has greenish or reddish depressions that appear to be deeper than the surface of the wall, the priest shall go out the doorway of the house and close it up for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall return to inspect the house. If the mold has spread on the walls, he's to order that the contaminated stones be torn out and thrown into an unclean place outside the town. He must have all the inside walls of the house scraped, and the material that is scraped off dumped into an unclean place outside the town. Then they're to take other stones to replace these, and take new clay and plaster the house. If the defiling mold reappears in the house after the stones have been torn out and the house scraped and plastered, the priest is to go and examine it. If the mold has spread in the house, it is a persistent defiling mold. The house is unclean. It must be torn down, its stones, timbers, and all the plaster, and taken out of the town to an unclean place. Anyone who goes into the house while it's closed up will be unclean till evening. Anyone who sleeps or eats in the house must wash their clothes. But if the priest comes to examine it and the mold has not spread after the house has been plastered, he'll pronounce the house clean, because the defiling mold is gone. To purify the house, he's to take 2 birds and some cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop. He shall kill one of the birds over fresh water in a clay pot. Then he's to take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet yarn, and the live bird, dip them into the blood of the dead bird and the fresh water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. He shall purify the house with the bird's blood, the fresh water, the live bird, in the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet yarn. Then he is to release the live bird in the open fields outside the town. In this way, he will make atonement for the house, and it will be clean. They didn't even know that this was a representation of Jesus Christ. This was just the ritual that had to be done, okay? These are the regulations for any defiling skin disease, for a sore, for defiling molds in fabric or in a house, and for a swelling, a rash, or a shiny spot, to determine when something is clean or unclean. These are the regulations for defiling skin diseases and defiling molds. And that's the end of that. Tomorrow we'll pick it up at Leviticus 15. I love you very much. Keep on praying, okay? Don't forget to pray. I love you, and I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.